If you enjoy my stories, please subscribe and hit the like button. I'd really appreciate it. Leave a comment telling me which city you're from and what time it is there. I'm curious to know where my favorite subscribers are from, and share the scariest story that ever happened to you. I'll pin the best one under the video forever. I never believed in ghosts until I moved to Hillcrest Apartments. Even now, sitting in this police station with trembling hands and bloodshot eyes, I can barely comprehend what happened to me. But I have to tell someone. I have to get this down on record. Before whatever took Sam comes for me too. My name is Detective Marcus Webb, and what I'm about to tell you isn't in any official report. It can't be. No one would believe it. Hell, I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen the evidence myself. It started 3 weeks ago when we got a missing persons report. Sam Matthews, 26 years old, software developer, had vanished from his apartment without a trace. Normally, we'd chalk it up to a voluntary disappearance. Young guy, probably had debts, girlfriend troubles, you know the drill. But this case was different. This case was wrong from the very beginning. Let me start from where Sam's story really begins, pieced together from his journal, phone records, and interviews with the neighbors who were brave enough to talk. Sam Matthews moved into apartment 3B at Hillcrest Manor on October 15th. It wasn't his first choice. The building was old, built in the 1960s with that particular kind of institutional ugliness that budget architects seemed to favor back then. Concrete walls, narrow hallways that always smelled faintly of disinfectant and other people's cooking, and lighting that made everyone look like they were dying of consumption. But the rent was cheap, and after losing his job at the tech startup downtown, cheap was all Sam could afford. His severance package would last a few months if he was careful, and he figured he'd find something else by then. He was good at what he did, even if his former boss was too stupid to recognize talent when it was debugging his crappy code. The apartment itself was small, but adequate. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that was little more than a counter with appliances, and a living room that could fit a couch and a television if you didn't mind bumping into furniture every time you walked through. The windows faced the parking lot, which wasn't much of a view, but at least he could see his car from the 3rd floor. His neighbors seemed like typical apartment dwellers, polite but distant, the kind of people who nod when they pass you in the hallway but never quite make eye contact. There was Mrs. Chen in 3A, an elderly Asian woman who always carried a canvas shopping bag and muttered to herself in what sounded like Mandarin. Across the hall in 3C lived the Johnsons, a middle-aged couple who worked different shifts at the hospital and passed each other like ships in the night. And in 3D, at the end of the hall, was Mrs. Blackwood. Sam only saw Mrs. Blackwood once during his first week, when he was coming home from a job interview that hadn't gone well. She was standing in her doorway, a thin woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to look right through him. She was wearing a faded blue house dress and slippers that had seen better days. "You're the new tenant," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." Sam Matthews. He tried to smile, but something about her gaze made it difficult. "Just moved into 3B." She studied him for a long moment, and Sam had the uncomfortable feeling that she was weighing him, measuring him against some standard he couldn't understand. "Keep your door locked," she said finally. "Always. And if someone knocks? She paused, her fingers gripping the doorframe. Well, you'll learn. Before Sam could ask what she meant, Mrs. Blackwood stepped back into her apartment and closed the door. He heard the sound of multiple locks engaging. Deadbolts, chain locks, what sounded like a security bar being set in place. Sam stood in the hallway for a moment, unsettled. Then he shook his head and went into his own apartment. Crazy old lady, he thought. Every building had one. For the first week, life in Hillcrest Manor was blissfully normal. Sam spent his days job hunting, sending out resumes, and setting up his small apartment. He bought furniture from thrift stores and garage sales, slowly making the space feel like home. The building was quiet during the day. Most of the tenants worked regular hours and reasonably quiet at night. The only sounds that carried through the thin walls were the usual apartment noises. Footsteps from the unit above, the murmur of television sets, the occasional argument from down the hall. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Sam was a light sleeper by nature, a habit left over from childhood when his father's drunken rages could erupt at any hour. He'd learned to wake at the slightest unusual sound, to lie still and listen until he was sure it was safe. It was a survival skill that had served him well growing up, and it was still with him at 26, which is why he woke up on the night of October 23rd. The sound was soft but distinct, a single knock on his door. Not the aggressive pounding of someone in distress, not the polite rap, rap, rap of a neighbor needing to borrow something, just one knock, deliberate, measured. Sam rolled over and looked at his phone. 2:17 a.m. He lay in bed, listening. The knock didn't repeat. After a few minutes, he got up and padded quietly to the front door. The apartment was small enough that he could see the door from his bedroom, but he moved carefully, avoiding the spots where the floorboards creaked. He pressed his eye to the peephole and looked out into the hallway. Empty. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting its sickly yellow glow on the worn carpet and faded wallpaper. The hallway stretched in both directions, completely vacant. Sam checked the security chain and the deadbolt. Both were still engaged, and went back to bed. Probably just the building settling, he told himself. Old buildings made all kinds of noises. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, 2:17 a.m. Same single knock. When Sam looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty again. This time, though, he noticed something else. The fluorescent light at the far end of the hall, near the stairwell, was flickering. Not the slow, steady flicker of a dying bulb, but an irregular strobe that made the shadows dance and shift. On the third night, Sam was ready. He'd positioned a chair near the door and had his phone ready to record video. At 2:15, he was sitting in the darkness of his living room, waiting. 2:17 came and went. No knock. 2:18, 2:19, 2:20. Sam was beginning to think he'd imagined the whole thing when the knock came at 2:23. But this time, it was different. Still a single knock, but heavier, more insistent. He crept to the peephole and looked out. The hallway was empty, but something was wrong with the light. It wasn't just flickering now. It was dimmer, as if something was absorbing the illumination. The shadows seemed deeper, more solid. And there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, seeping under the door. It smelled like earth, like something that had been buried for a long time. Sam stepped back from the door, his heart hammering. He grabbed his phone and dialed the building superintendent's emergency number. "Hillcrest Manor. This is Frank," came a gravelly voice after several rings. "Hi, this is Sam Matthews in 3B. I'm sorry to call so late, but I think someone's been knocking on my door in the middle of the night. I was wondering if..." "What time?" "Around 2:20, 2:25. There was a pause. "You see anybody?" "No, but..." "Then it's probably nothing. Old building, lots of noises, pipes, settling. Could be anything. You want me to check it out in the morning?" Sam hesitated. The smell was getting stronger, and now he could hear something else, a soft scratching sound like fingernails on wood. "Actually, could you maybe come up now? I think someone might be trying to break in." "Look, kid, I've been managing this place for 15 years. If someone was trying to break in, they wouldn't be knocking first. You sure you're not just having trouble sleeping? New place, stress, all that?" The scratching sound stopped abruptly. Maybe you're right. Sorry to bother you." "No problem. But listen, if it keeps happening, you might want to talk to Mrs. Blackwood. She's been here the longest, knows all the building's quirks. Just be prepared for an earful. That old lady's got stories about everything." Sam hung up and pressed his ear to the door. The hallway was silent now, and the smell was fading. Whatever had been out there was gone. But as he walked back to his bedroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not from outside, from somewhere much closer, as if something had already found its way inside and was hiding in the shadows of his own apartment. The next morning brought gray October sunlight and the comfortable mundanity of breakfast and coffee. In the light of day, the previous night's events seemed less sinister. Old building, new environment, stress from job hunting. Frank the super was probably right. Sam had always been prone to anxiety, and living alone for the first time in years was bound to play tricks on his mind. He decided to take Frank's advice and talk to Mrs. Blackwood, not about mysterious knocking. That still seemed too crazy to voice to a stranger, but maybe about the building in general. She'd mentioned something odd the day he moved in, and long-time residents were usually the best source of information about a place's quirks. Sam waited until afternoon, when he figured Mrs. Blackwood would be most likely to be home. He knocked on her door, 3 polite raps, and waited. The sound of locks disengaging came from within, one after another. 5 different locks, Sam counted. When the door finally opened, it only opened a few inches, held in place by a security chain. Mrs. Blackwood's gray eyes peered out at him through the gap. "Mr. Matthews," her voice was neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. "Hi, Mrs. Blackwood. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the building. The super mentioned you've been here the longest." Questions about what? Sam struggled for a way to phrase it that wouldn't make him sound insane. "Well, I've been hearing some noises at night. Probably nothing. But I thought maybe you'd know if there were any issue with the building settling problems, maintenance issues, that kind of thing." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of noises?" "Mostly just knocking on my door." The chain rattled as Mrs. Blackwood's grip tightened on the door. For a moment, Sam thought she was going to slam it in his face. Instead, she closed it entirely, and he heard the chain being removed. When the door opened again, it opened fully, revealing Mrs. Blackwood in the same faded house dress she'd worn the week before. Her apartment behind her was dark, heavy curtains blocking most of the daylight. "Come in," she said, "but be quiet. They don't like loud noises during the day." "They? Come in first." Sam stepped into the apartment, and Mrs. Blackwood immediately closed the door behind him, engaging all 5 locks. The apartment was laid out identically to his own, but it felt completely different. Where Sam's apartment was sparse and modern, Mrs. Blackwood's was cluttered with the accumulation of decades dark wooden furniture, doilies on every surface, photographs in ornate frames covering the walls. The air smelled of mothballs and lavender. "Sit," Mrs. Blackwood said, gesturing to a worn armchair, "and tell me exactly what you've been hearing." Sam sat, feeling like a child called to the principal's office. "It's probably nothing, just a knock on my door, usually around 2 in the morning. When I look through the peephole, there's nobody there." "How many knocks?" "Just one each time." Mrs. Blackwood visibly relaxed, though she still looked worried. "One knock. That's good. How long has this been happening?" 3 nights now." "Well, 4 if you count last night, but it was a little different then." "Different how?" Sam described the heavier knock, the smell, the scratching sound. As he talked, Mrs. Blackwood's expression grew more and more grave. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "Mrs. Blackwood, do you know what's causing this?" She looked up at him, and Sam was startled to see fear in her eyes. Real, deep fear. "I've lived in this building for 37 years, she said slowly. "Moved in when my husband died. Couldn't afford to keep the house. And in all that time, I've learned one very important rule. Never open your door after midnight unless you hear 3 knocks. 3 knocks? 3 means it's safe. 3 means it's human. 1 knock." She shook her head. "1 knock is how it tests, seeing if you're awake, if you're listening. 2 knocks means it's getting stronger, more confident. But 3, she trailed off, and Sam had to prompt her. "What about 3? If it ever knocks 3 times, don't open the door. Not for anyone, not for anything, because by then, it's learned enough to pretend to be someone you trust." Sam felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, it? What are we talking about here?" Mrs. Blackwood stood up and walked to one of the photographs on the wall. It showed a much younger version of herself standing next to a tall man in a suit. Both were smiling. "My husband Walter was a practical man," she said. "Didn't believe in anything he couldn't see or touch. When I first told him about the knocking, he laughed. Said it was just my imagination. Or maybe some kids playing pranks." She touched the frame gently. "This building has a history, Mr. Matthews. It was built on the site of the old Hillcrest Sanatorium. They tore down the hospital in 1958 and built these apartments 5 years later. But some things don't stay buried." "A sanatorium? What kind of sanatorium?" "Mental health facility, opened in 1923, closed in 1956 after a scandal. Mistreatment of patients, experimental procedures, people dying under suspicious circumstances. By the time they shut it down, over 300 people had died there." Sam's rational mind rebelled against where this conversation was heading. "Mrs. Blackwood, with all due respect, I don't really believe in ghosts." She turned back to him, and there was no trace of the confused elderly woman he'd expected to find. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and completely serious. Belief doesn't matter, she said. Truth doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. And the truth is that something from that place is still here. It feeds on attention, contact. The more you acknowledge it, the stronger it gets. So what am I supposed to do? Ignore it. As much as you can. Don't look through the peephole when it knocks. Don't respond. Don't let it know you're aware of it. Maybe it will lose interest and move on to someone else. And if it doesn't? Mrs. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. Then you need to decide how much your life is worth to you. Because people have disappeared from this building, Mr. Matthews, more than the police reports show, and the ones who stay, sometimes they're not the same afterward. What do you mean? 3 years ago, there was a young woman in 2C, Sarah Klein, sweet girl, worked as a nurse at the hospital downtown. She started hearing the knocking, same as you, but she didn't listen to my warnings. On the night it knocked 3 times, she opened the door. What happened? She was found the next morning sitting in her kitchen, completely catatonic, couldn't speak, couldn't recognize anyone. They took her to the state hospital, and as far as I know, she's still there. But her apartment... Mrs. Blackwood shuddered. For weeks after, you could hear someone walking around in there, furniture being moved, the shower running at all hours. The landlord finally went in to clean it out, and everything was destroyed, furniture broken, walls covered in marks, like someone had been clawing at them. Sam felt his mouth go dry. But if she was in the hospital, that's just it, she was. Whoever was in that apartment, it wasn't Sarah. Not anymore. They sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Sam stood up. Thank you for telling me all this. I should probably get back. Mrs. Blackwood walked him to the door and began unlocking the chain locks. Mr. Matthews, she said as she worked, if you decide to move out, do it during the day. And don't tell anyone you're leaving. Sometimes it doesn't like to let people go. As Sam walked back to his apartment, his mind was reeling. Part of him wanted to dismiss everything Mrs. Blackwood had told him as the ramblings of an old woman who'd lived alone too long. But there had been something in her eyes, something in the way she spoke, that convinced him she believed every word. And if she was right... Sam stopped in front of his door, key in hand. For the first time since moving in, his apartment didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a trap. That night, Sam didn't even try to sleep. He sat in his living room with all the lights on, laptop open, researching everything he could find about Hillcrest Sanatorium. What he found made Mrs. Blackwood's story seem almost understated. The Hillcrest Sanatorium had indeed opened in 1923, advertised as a progressive facility for the treatment of mental illness and neurological disorders. It was built with the most modern conveniences of the time: electric lighting, steam heat, private rooms for wealthy patients, and communal wards for the indigent. Dr. Harrison Wickham, the facility's chief physician, had studied under some of the most prominent alienists of the early 20th century. He was a proponent of aggressive intervention for severe cases, including experimental procedures that would later be recognized as torture. The newspaper archives were full of stories, starting from the late 1920s. Patients who died under mysterious circumstances, families who sent loved ones to Hillcrest and never saw them again, Workers who quit after reporting strange incidents, voices in empty rooms, patients who seemed to know things they couldn't possibly know, equipment that operated by itself. In 1934, a nurse named Margaret Torres disappeared from the facility. She was last seen doing her evening rounds on the 3rd floor of the East Wing. Her body was never found, but her uniform was discovered in the basement morgue, torn and covered in what appeared to be claw marks. In 1941, a patient named Frederick Chase somehow managed to lock himself in the hydrotherapy room and turned the water temperature up to maximum. By the time staff broke down the door, he had been boiled alive. The official report stated that the door's locking mechanism had malfunctioned, but 3 witnesses claimed they heard Chase laughing until the very end. The final incident came in 1956. Dr. Wickham was found dead in his office, apparently from a heart attack, but the circumstances were unusual. His office door was locked from the inside, yet when staff broke in, they found evidence that someone else had been present. Wickham's desk was covered in patient files, all dating from the 1920s and 1930s, and all belonging to patients who had died at the facility. On top of the pile was a note in Wickham's handwriting. They're coming back, all of them. 3 months later, the state closed Hillcrest Sanatorium permanently. Sam leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. It was past midnight, and the apartment felt colder despite the heater running. He looked through the newspaper records for any mention of the current apartment building, but found only a brief article from 1963 announcing the opening of Hillcrest Manor, a modern housing complex built on the site of the former medical facility. No mention of any ongoing problems, no reports of disappearances or strange incidents. But then again, Sam thought, who would want to publicize something like that? Property values would plummet, and no one would want to live here. He was so absorbed in his research that he almost missed it when it happened. 2:31 a.m. Knock. Knock. 2 knocks this time. Deliberate, measured, about 3 seconds apart. Sam's blood turned to ice water. He closed the laptop screen and sat perfectly still, listening. The knocks didn't repeat, but after a moment, he heard something else. The soft whisper of fabric against the door, as if someone was leaning against it. Then came the smell, stronger than before. Not just earth now, but something else. Something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Sam forced himself to remain motionless. "Don't look through the peephole," Mrs. Blackwood had said. "Don't let it know you're aware of it." But the temptation was overwhelming. He needed to know what was out there, needed to see if it was real or just his imagination running wild after reading about the sanatorium. Very slowly, he stood up and crept toward the door. The smell was getting stronger, and now he could hear something else. A soft scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across wood. It seemed to be coming from the door itself, as if something was drawing patterns on the outside surface. Sam pressed his eye to the peephole. At first, he saw nothing but the familiar hallway, dimly lit by the flickering fluorescent light. But then a shadow moved at the edge of his vision, and he realized that someone was standing just outside the peephole's range of view. As he watched, the shadow moved closer, and Sam could make out the edge of a dark coat or jacket. Then an arm came into view, pale and thin, with fingers that seemed too long for any human hand. The fingers moved slowly across the door, tracing patterns that Sam couldn't quite make out. The scratching sound grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was out there wasn't just touching the door anymore. It was carving something into the wood. Sam's heart was hammering so hard he was sure it could be heard in the hallway. He wanted to step back from the door, to retreat to his bedroom and hide under the covers like a frightened child, but something held him frozen at the peephole, watching those impossible fingers work. Then the arm disappeared, and a face moved into view. Sam bit back a scream. It was a man, or had been once. The features were human. Eyes, nose, mouth, in the right places, but wrong in every detail. The skin was waxy and pale with dark veins visible beneath the surface. The eyes were completely black, no whites visible, and they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The mouth was stretched in a smile that was far too wide, revealing teeth that were either rotted or filed to points. But the worst part was that the face looked familiar. Sam couldn't place it at first, but there was something about the bone structure, the shape of the jaw. Then it hit him. The face belonged to one of the patients from the newspaper photographs he'd been reading about. A man named Thomas Crane, who had died at Hillcrest Sanatorium in 1938. The thing at his door tilted its head, as if it knew Sam was watching. Its black eyes seemed to focus directly on the peephole, and its too wide smile grew even broader. Then it raised one impossibly long finger and placed it against the peephole, blocking Sam's view. Sam jerked back from the door as if he'd been burned. The scratching sound stopped abruptly, and the hallway fell silent. He stood frozen in his living room, every muscle tense, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed. The smell began to fade. Whatever had been at his door was gone. But when Sam finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole again, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Carved into the door, just below the peephole, were 3 symbols. They looked almost like letters, but in no alphabet Sam recognized. They seemed to have been carved recently. Thin curls of wood shavings were still scattered on the hallway carpet, and underneath the symbols, in smaller scratches, were 3 words in English. Soon you open. Sam didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He sat in his living room with his back to the wall, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. But the hallway remained quiet, and when dawn finally came, the only sounds in the building were the normal ones. People getting ready for work, footsteps in the hallway, the distant hum of traffic. When he was sure it was late enough that Mrs. Blackwood would be awake, Sam knocked on her door. This time, she opened it immediately, as if she'd been expecting him. It knocked twice, Sam said without preamble. Mrs. Blackwood's face went pale. Come in, quickly. Once again, Sam found himself in her cluttered apartment, while she engaged all 5 locks. But this time, she also went to the windows and checked that the heavy curtains were tightly closed. Tell me everything, she said. Sam described the night in detail. The 2 knocks, the scratching, the face in the peephole, the symbols carved into his door. When he finished, Mrs. Blackwood was silent for a long time. Show me your hands, she said finally. What? Your hands, let me see them. Sam held out his hands, palms up. Mrs. Blackwood examined them carefully, particularly his fingertips and the area under his nails. Good, she said. No marks. You haven't touched the symbols. What do you mean? The symbols it carves, they're not just decoration. They're a form of a contact. If you touch them, you're acknowledging its presence, accepting its invitation. Invitation to what? Mrs. Blackwood walked to her kitchen and put a kettle on the stove. Her movements were deliberate, methodical, as if the familiar routine helped her think. I told you yesterday that people have disappeared from this building. What I didn't tell you is how it happens. The process. Sam waited while she prepared tea, the silence stretching between them. It always starts the same way, she continued. 1 knock to test, 2 knocks to establish contact, and then 3 knocks. Yes, but here's the thing. By the time it knocks 3 times, it's not just announcing its presence anymore, it's demonstrating its power. Because by then, it can make itself look like anyone, sound like anyone. It's learned enough about you to become whatever you most want to see. The kettle began to whistle, and Mrs. Blackwood poured hot water into 2 chipped china cups. The last person who disappeared was a man named David Ruiz. This was about 6 months ago. He lived in 2B, had been hearing the knocking for about 2 weeks. On the night it knocked 3 times, David was on the phone with his sister when it happened. She heard him answer the door, heard him talking to someone. Who was he talking to? According to his sister, it was their mother. She'd been dead for 10 years, but David was talking to her like she was standing right there. His sister could hear the voice through the phone. It sounded exactly like their mother, down to the pet names she used to call them. The last thing David said was, "Of course, Mom. I've missed you so much. Come in." Mrs. Blackwood handed Sam a cup of tea. It was too hot and tasted like flowers, but he drank it anyway. David's sister called the police when the line went dead. They found his apartment door standing wide open, but no sign of David, no sign of a struggle. Just, she paused, staring into her tea. Just scratch marks on the walls. Deep ones, like something with claws had been trying to dig its way out. But Mrs. Blackwood, what you're describing, it's impossible. I mean, even if I believed in ghosts, how could something that's dead interact with the physical world like that? How could it carve symbols into my door? Mrs. Blackwood set down her cup and looked at him with an expression that was almost pitying. You're still thinking about this like it's some poor lost spirit, aren't you? Some confused ghost who doesn't know it's dead? Isn't that what we're talking about? Mr. Matthews, what if I told you that not everything that dies stays dead? And not everything that comes back is what it used to be? She stood up and walked to a bookshelf in the corner of the room. After searching for a moment, she pulled out a leather-bound journal and brought it back to the table. This belonged to my husband, Walter. He was a skeptic, like you, until he started experiencing the knocking. This journal documents everything he learned during the 3 months before he... She didn't finish the sentence, but Sam could guess how it ended. Before he what? Before he opened the door on the 3rd knock. Mrs. Blackwood opened the journal to a page marked with a red ribbon. The handwriting was masculine but shaky, as if written by someone whose hands were trembling. Read this entry. It's dated March 15th, 1987. Sam took the journal and read. It spoke to me again last night, not through the door this time. It was inside the apartment. I woke up and found it standing at the foot of my bed, wearing Margaret's face, my wife's face, but wrong somehow. The features were perfect, but the expression, God, the expression was like nothing Margaret would ever wear, pure hunger. It smiled at me with her mouth and spoke with her voice. But the words weren't hers. It said, "Walter, why won't you let me come home? I've been waiting so long. I'm so cold out here." But Margaret has been dead for 6 years. Margaret is buried in Greenwood Cemetery, and I was at her funeral. I held her hand as she died. But this thing, it has her memories. It knows things only Margaret would know. It told me about our wedding night, about the birthmark on her shoulder that no one else ever saw. It knows the nickname she called me when we were alone. How can something know these things if it isn't her? Dr. Peterson thinks I'm having a psychotic break. He's increased my medication again. But the pills don't make it go away. If anything, they make it easier for the thing to get inside my head. I found more research about the sanatorium today. There were experiments being conducted there in the 1940s and 1950s. Dr. Wickham was trying to prove that consciousness could survive bodily death. He believed that if he could capture the exact moment of transition from life to death, he could somehow preserve the essence of a person. The experiments were horrific. Patients were subjected to near-death experiences repeatedly: suffocation, electrocution, hypothermia, then revived at the last possible moment. Many died in the process. But according to the records I found, Wickham believed he had succeeded with several subjects. What if he was right? What if those patients' consciousness didn't die with their bodies? What if they're still here, still trapped, but changed by what was done to them? I think that's what's been visiting me. Not Margaret, but something that has consumed her memory, her appearance, her voice. Something that learned to be her by devouring what remained of her after death, and I think it's getting stronger. Sam looked up from the journal. "This is your husband's writing?" Mrs. Blackwood nodded. Walter was a professor of physics at the university, not a man given to flights of fancy. When he started believing in this, I knew it was real. What happened to him? On March 18th, 3 days after that entry, it knocked 3 times. I was visiting my sister that night, or I might have tried to stop him. When I came home the next morning, I found the door open and Walter gone, just like David Ruiz, just like all the others. She closed the journal and held it against her chest. But Walter left me something, a way to fight back, hidden in the last pages of this journal. Sam felt a spark of hope. What kind of way? The thing that's been visiting you isn't really the spirits of the people who died at the sanatorium. It's something else, something that feeds on human consciousness. The experiments Dr. Wickham conducted didn't preserve the patient's souls. They created feeding opportunities for something that had been waiting a very long time for access to human minds. I don't understand. Think of it as a parasite, a psychic parasite that consumes identity, memory, personality, everything that makes a person who they are. The sanatorium experiments gave it a way to anchor itself to our world, to take physical form, and once it has consumed enough human consciousness, it can perfectly mimic anyone it has fed on. Mrs. Blackwood opened the journal to the back pages where the writing was different, more frantic, desperate. Walter figured out how to weaken it, how to break the anchor that holds it here. But the process. She looked up at Sam with tears in her eyes. The process requires someone to willingly enter the space between life and death, to go where it lives and destroy it from the inside. That's suicide. Yes, but Walter believed it was the only way to stop it from taking more people, and he was right, for a while. After he sacrificed himself, the knocking stopped for almost 5 years, but then it started again, weaker at first, but growing stronger. Sam set down his teacup with hands that were no longer quite steady. Mrs. Blackwood, I appreciate everything you've told me, but this is insane. Even if I believe that there was some kind of psychic parasite living in this building, I'm not about to kill myself to stop it. I'm not asking you to. There might be another way. What do you mean? Mrs. Blackwood stood up and walked to a closet near the front door. When she opened it, Sam could see it was packed with boxes and old suitcases. I've been preparing for this conversation for months, she said, pulling out a medium-sized cardboard box. Ever since the knocking started again, I knew it would eventually find a new target, someone who might be strong enough to fight back. She carried the box back to the table and opened it. Inside was a collection of items that looked like they belonged in a museum. Old photographs, handwritten documents, and several glass vials containing what looked like ash. These are the remnants of the original sanatorium. Walter collected them during his research. The photographs show the rooms where the experiments took place. The documents are Dr. Wickham's original notes. And this, she picked up one of the vials. This is ash from the crematorium where they burned the bodies of the patients who died during the experiments. What am I supposed to do with these? The ash contains traces of the original binding that holds the parasite to our world. If you can get it to manifest fully, to take complete physical form, you can use the ash to break the connection. But you have to be careful. Once it's fully manifested, it's at its most dangerous. It will try to possess you completely, to consume your consciousness and add it to its collection. Sam stared at the vial of ash. In the gray powder, he could see small fragments of what might have been bone. How do I know this isn't just the rambling of two people who lost their grip on reality? Mrs. Blackwood smiled sadly. You don't, but in about 12 hours, it's going to knock on your door 3 times, and when it does, you'll have to make a choice. You can open the door and let it take you, the way David Ruiz did. You can try to ignore it and hope it goes away, which it won't, or you can fight back. She handed him the box. If you choose to fight, here's what you need to do. Sam spent the rest of the day in his apartment, reading through Walter's research and trying to make sense of the plan Mrs. Blackwood had outlined. It sounded like something out of a horror movie. Ritual ash, psychic parasites, battles between life and death. Every rational part of his mind insisted that he was losing his grip on reality, but the symbols carved into his door were real. The face he'd seen through the peephole was real, and the growing sense of dread that filled his apartment as evening approached was definitely real. According to Walter's research, the parasite fed on consciousness, but it could only fully possess someone who willingly invited it in. That's why it knocked. It needed permission to enter, some acknowledgement of its presence. The knocking was a form of psychological pressure designed to wear down the victim's resistance until they finally opened the door. Once invited in, the parasite would begin the process of consumption. It would take on the appearance of someone the victim trusted, a deceased loved one, usually, and use that disguise to get close enough to begin feeding. The process was apparently agonizing, but irreversible. Within hours, the victim's consciousness would be completely absorbed, leaving behind an empty shell that the parasite could inhabit. The plan Mrs. Blackwood had outlined was risky to the point of being suicidal. Sam would have to let the parasite into his apartment, allow it to begin the possession process, and then use the crematorium ash to break its connection to the physical world at the exact moment it was most vulnerable. If he timed it wrong, he would be consumed. If the ash didn't work, he would be consumed. If he lost his nerve at any point in the process, he would be consumed. But if he did nothing, he would be consumed anyway. The parasite had progressed from 1 knock to 2. Tonight, it would knock 3 times, and when it did, it would be strong enough to take him, whether he opened the door or not. As the sun set outside his apartment windows, Sam made his preparations. He arranged the crematorium ash in a circle around his living room, following the pattern Walter had diagrammed in his journal. He placed the old photographs of the sanatorium at strategic points around the circle and positioned himself in the center with Walter's research journal open to the binding ritual. At 11:47 p.m., he turned off all the lights in his apartment and sat waiting in the darkness. At 12:15 a.m., he heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate steps that paused outside his door. At 1:33 a.m., the temperature in his apartment dropped 20 degrees in the space of a few seconds. His breath began to mist, and frost formed on the windows. At 2:17 a.m., it knocked once. The sound was different this time, not the tentative tap of the previous nights, but a booming crash that seemed to shake the entire building. Sam felt the vibration through the floor, through his bones. At 2:19 a.m., it knocked twice. The second set of knocks came in rapid succession, like machine gun fire. Each impact sent a shudder through the door, and Sam could hear wood beginning to crack. The smell of earth and decay filled the apartment, so strong now that he had to fight and not to vomit. At 2:21 a.m., silence fell. Sam sat in the circle of ash, journal open in his lap, waiting. The apartment was so cold now that ice was forming on the inside of the windows. His breath came in sharp puffs, and his fingers were numb despite the gloves he was wearing. Then, at 2:23 a.m., he heard a voice from the hallway. "Sam? Sam, honey, are you in there?" Sam's heart stopped. It was his mother's voice. Clear, warm, exactly as he remembered it from before the cancer took her 2 years ago. "Sam, I'm so cold out here. Please let me in." Tears started running down Sam's face. The voice was perfect, not just the sound, but the intonation, the slight accent his mother had never quite lost from her childhood in North Carolina. Even the way she said his name, with that particular mix of love and concern that only she had ever managed. "I've missed you so much, sweetheart. I know you've been having a hard time since I've been gone. I'm here to help." Sam gripped the journal tighter. This was what Walter had written about. The parasite using the appearance and voice of loved ones to manipulate its victims. But knowing that intellectually was very different from experiencing it emotionally. The knocking came again, 3 times, measured, patient. "Sam, I know you're in there, honey. Why won't you answer the door?" The voice was starting to change, subtly. Still his mother's voice, but with an edge to it that hadn't been there before, a note of frustration, or maybe hunger. You're being very rude, Sam. I didn't raise you to ignore your mother when she's speaking to you. Sam forced himself to stay in the circle. Don't respond, Walter had written. Don't acknowledge it until it's fully manifested. The knocking came again, louder this time. 3 thunderous blows that made the door buckle in its frame. Open this door right now, Samuel Robert Matthews. That was wrong. His mother had never used his full name like that. Even when she was angry, the parasite was losing patience, letting its true nature show through the disguise. Another series of knocks, so violent that Sam could hear the hinges groaning. Then the sound changed. No longer knocks, but the splintering of wood as something began to tear the door apart. "If you won't let me in the nice way," the voice said, and now it was definitely not his mother's voice anymore. "Then I'll find another way." The sounds from the hallway stopped abruptly. Sam sat perfectly still, listening to his own heartbeat and the soft whistle of his breathing in the frigid air. Then he heard movement inside his apartment. It was behind him, near the kitchen, the soft whisper of bare feet on linoleum. Sam didn't turn around. According to Walter's research, looking directly at the parasite before it was fully manifested could allow it to begin the possession process immediately. "Hello, Sam." The voice was right behind him now, still recognizably his mother's voice, but distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "Why are you sitting on the floor, honey? And what's all this ash? You've made such a mess." Sam could feel its presence behind him, a cold spot that seemed to drain the warmth from his body. He opened the journal to the page with the binding ritual and began to read aloud. "I call upon the names of those who died in torment, whose pain anchors you to this world." "Sam, what are you doing? You're scaring me." The voice was changing again, becoming younger. Now it sounded like his mother had when he was a child, uncertain and afraid. "Stop reading from that book, sweetie. Come, give Mommy a hug." Sam continued reading. "By the ashes of the burned, by the bones of the forgotten, by the screams of the tormented." Something touched his shoulder. The contact was so cold, it felt like being branded with ice. Sam could feel his skin burning where the fingers made contact, but he kept reading. "I bind you to your true form. I strip away your stolen faces. I call you by your real name." "Stop it!" The voice was no longer his mother's. It was something else entirely. A sound like breaking glass, mixed with the cries of dying animals. "Stop it now!" The cold presence behind him was growing larger, more solid. Sam could hear his furniture being pushed aside as the thing took on its true form. He still didn't turn around. "Samuel, son of Margaret, blood of my blood. She is mine now," the thing shrieked. "I have consumed her. I have made her part of me. She begs you to stop. She begs you to turn around and embrace her." Sam's voice cracked, but he kept reading. "By the true names of the dead, I command you to show yourself as you really are." The temperature in the room plummeted even further. The ice on the windows began to crack from the cold. And then Sam heard a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The wet, tearing noise of something reshaping itself at a fundamental level. When the sound stopped, Sam finally turned around. The thing standing in his kitchen was enormous, easily 8 feet tall and so thin it looked like a spider made of shadow and bone. Its skin was translucent, showing the black veins beneath, and its limbs were jointed in ways that hurt to look at. But the worst part was its face, or rather, faces. The surface of its head rippled constantly, showing brief glimpses of the people it had consumed. Sam saw his mother's face for a fraction of a second, twisted with pain and terror, before it was replaced by that of an elderly man, then a young woman, then a child. "You cannot banish me," it said, and its voice was a chorus of all the people it had devoured. "I am anchored by pain, by the suffering of those who fed me. As long as there is death, there is food. As long as there is loss, there is hunger." Sam reached for the vial of ash, with hands that were shaking so badly he could barely grip it. "I have walked between worlds for 1,000 years, the thing continued, taking a step toward him. "I have consumed kings and peasants, saints and sinners. What makes you think you can stand against me?" "Because," Sam said, uncorking the vial, "you made one mistake." The parasite paused, its head tilting with inhuman curiosity. "You took on the appearance of my mother, but my mother would never want me to give up. She'd want me to fight." Sam threw the ash directly at the thing's chest. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Where the ash touched the parasite's skin, it began to burn with a cold, blue flame. The creature let out a scream that shattered every piece of glass in the apartment and sent Sam reeling backward against the wall. "The dead are not yours to command," Sam shouted over the noise, reading from the journal as the parasite writhed and burned. "Return to the spaces between. Return to the void that spawned you." The blue flame spread across the creature's body, and as they did, faces began to appear in the fire. Not the twisted, agonized expressions Sam had seen before, but peaceful faces, relieved faces. The people the parasite had consumed were being freed. Among them, he saw his mother. Her face appeared in the flames for just a moment, and she smiled at him with the same warm expression she'd worn when she tucked him into bed as a child. Then she faded, and Sam knew she was finally at rest. The parasite's screams grew weaker as more ash burned away its stolen substance. Its form began to collapse, the impossible anatomy crumbling like a house of cards. "This is not over," it whispered, with the last of its strength. "There are others like me, others who hunger, others who wait." Then it was gone, leaving nothing behind but the lingering smell of ash and the memory of blue flames. Sam sat in the wreckage of his apartment, surrounded by broken glass and melted ice, and wept. Not for the thing he had destroyed, but for his mother, whom he had finally been able to let go. I wish I could tell you that was the end of the story. I wish I could tell you that Sam Matthews moved out of Hillcrest Manor the next day and lived happily ever after. But police work has taught me that life rarely provides such clean endings. Sam did move out, just as Mrs. Blackwood had advised. During the day, without telling anyone he was leaving, he found a new apartment across town and tried to rebuild his life. For a while, it seemed like he had succeeded. He got a new job, started dating again, began to put the nightmare behind him. But 3 months later, he called Mrs. Blackwood in a panic. The knocking had started again. It wasn't the same entity he had destroyed, but something else. Something that had learned from the first parasite's mistakes. This one was smarter, more patient. It didn't knock at his door. It sent him text messages from his dead mother's phone number. It left voicemails that sounded exactly like her voice. It sent him emails with photographs of his childhood that only she should have had. According to Mrs. Blackwood, Sam became obsessed with finding and destroying these entities. He spent his savings traveling around the country, tracking down reports of similar incidents. He developed a network of contacts, people like Mrs. Blackwood, who had encountered these parasites and survived. The last time anyone heard from Sam was 6 months ago. He had been investigating reports of mysterious disappearances in a small town in Oregon, built on the site of an old psychiatric hospital. He checked into a motel on a Tuesday and was supposed to check out on Friday. On Friday morning, the motel owner found his room empty. All of Sam's belongings were still there, including his phone and wallet. But Sam was gone. The only sign of what had happened was a message scratched into the bathroom mirror. I didn't open the door, but it found another way in. Which brings me to why I'm telling you this story. Yesterday, I moved into a new apartment. It's on the 3rd floor of an old building, recently renovated, reasonably priced. Last night, around 2:17 a.m., someone knocked on my door just once. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. But this morning, I found something carved into my door. 3 symbols that hurt to look at. And underneath them, 3 words, "Soon you open." I've been researching the history of this building. It was built in 1962 on the site of the old Riverside Sanitarium. The sanitarium burned down in 1959, but not before its chief physician, Dr. Edmund Blackthorne, conducted a series of experiments on patients suffering from severe mental illness. The experiments were designed to prove that consciousness could survive bodily death. Some of the patients died during the procedures. Their bodies were cremated in the basement of the hospital. I think some part of them is still here. Tonight, I'm going to be ready. I've been in touch with Mrs. Blackwood, and she's sending me Walter's journal and some of the original crematorium ash. She's also given me the names of others who have faced these entities and survived. But I wanted to get this story down first, just in case. If something happens to me, if I disappear like Sam Matthews and David Ruiz and all the others, maybe someone will read this and understand what they're up against. These things are spreading. Dr. Wickham's experiments weren't unique. Dr. Blackthorne wasn't the only physician who thought death could be conquered through science across the country. In dozens of cities, old hospitals and asylums were built on sites where terrible things happened. And in some of those places, the things that died are still dying over and over again, feeding whatever waits in the spaces between life and death. If you ever find yourself living in a building with a dark history, if you ever hear knocking at your door in the middle of the night, remember this: don't open until you hear 3 knocks. And if you do hear 3 knocks, don't open at all. Because by then, it's not knocking to ask permission anymore. It's knocking to let you know it's already inside. Final entry, Detective Marcus Webb, October 31st, 2023. They found my apartment empty this morning. Door locked from the inside, windows secure, no sign of forced entry, just like all the others. But I left this recording running on my phone, hidden where they'll eventually find it. I want people to know what happened. I want them to understand. It knocked once last night at 2:17 a.m. I was ready with the ash, with Walter's ritual, with everything Mrs. Blackwood had taught me. But it didn't knock twice at 2:19. It didn't knock 3 times at 2:21. Instead, At 2:18, I heard my mother's voice calling from inside my apartment. She was already inside, had been inside all along, waiting for me to come home. "Marcus, honey, why did you lock all these locks? I just want to give you a hug." I tried to perform the ritual, tried to use the ash, but it was too late. The thing wearing my mother's face was too close, too strong. I could feel my thoughts becoming fuzzy, my memories blending with its hunger. The last thing I remember clearly is my mother's face, but with those black, endless eyes. She smiled at me with genuine love and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. It doesn't hurt for long. And afterward, we'll be together forever." I can feel myself slipping away now. My memories becoming its memories. My voice becoming its voice. But I managed to hide this recording where the morning shift will find it. Maybe it will help the next person. Maybe they'll be smarter than I was. Or maybe it's already too late. Maybe these things have been spreading for so long that there's nowhere left to run. If you're listening to this, check your door. Check it carefully. Do you see any symbols carved into the wood? 3 marks that seem to writhe when you're not looking directly at them. If you do, then it's already chosen you. And all you can do is wait for the knocking to begin. 1 knock means it's testing. 2 knocks means it's learning. 3 knocks means it's time. And after 3 knocks, after 3 knocks, you won't be you anymore. But don't worry, we'll take good care of your voice, your face, your memories. We'll use them to call to the next person, and the next, and the next. Soon everyone will hear the knocking. Soon everyone will open the door. Soon everyone will join us in the spaces between life and death, where there is no pain, no loneliness, no fear, only hunger, always hunger. Recording ends. This transcript was found on Detective Marcus Webb's phone after his disappearance on November 1st, 2023. Detective Webb had been investigating a series of missing person cases in the greater Portland area. His body was never recovered. The building where Detective Webb lived was demolished in December 2023 after several more residents went missing. Under similar circumstances, the demolition crew reported finding a series of underground tunnels beneath the building, connecting it to a network of similar tunnels that ran throughout the city. The tunnels were sealed with concrete, but sometimes, late at night, residents of nearby buildings report hearing sounds from beneath the streets, scratching, whispers, and occasionally the sound of someone knocking, always 3 times. If you hear it, remember Detective Webb's warning. Don't open the door, no matter who asks, no matter how much they sound like someone you love, because they're not asking to come in anymore. They're letting you know they're already there.